The path from book to screen is one that countless, and I mean countless projects have faced for over a century. Pretty much since cinema began at the tail end of the 1800s, studios and filmmakers have turned to books and epic poems as a foundational element of filmmaking. They found a new mode of storytelling, now all they needed were the stories to tell. But what about those stories that face the opposite trajectory? What about those stories that are born as movies and are later turned into books? There's a reason why this path is far less discussed in the grand scheme of media studies. It almost never happens. Whereas it would take days, weeks even, to rattle off every single book that has ever been adapted into a film, you can probably knock out every movie turned book before you finished lunch. More often than not, a novelized adaptation of a film will basically constitute a literal novelization of the plot that you've already experienced on the screen, verbatim. Need some personal reading to bring to English class? Just get the novelization of Kung Fu Panda and basically relive the entire story as you've already seen it. But adaptations, by nature, should be adaptive, in more ways than just the medium. They should exist to add something new to the table, and you'd think a medium in which more detailed thoughts and vivid subjectivity are staples would be the perfect breeding ground to add new dimensions to a film's story. So why are these projects so rare? Why do so many authors find themselves working directly on the film adaptations of their own works, be it as screenwriters or even the directors, while nearly all filmmakers are content in the medium that made them a known name? In short, I can't answer that. I know, some video essay, right? But I think the reason why so few filmmakers make the jump to books, while more authors make the jump to film, comes down to personal sensibilities. Well, that and money. Instead, I want to take this opportunity to talk about one specific filmmaker who did make the jump to novels, adapting one of his own films into a best-selling retelling of his best-selling film. And that director is, of course, Quentin Tarantino. Yeah, everybody's got to make a Tarantino video at some point, so I'm just knocking this one out of the park now. For over 30 years, Tarantino has made a name for himself as one of the most dynamic, recognizable directors in American cinema today. And for the most part, that lofty reputation is attributed to his dual role as writer and director. Nearly anyone can identify a Tarantino conversation just by listening to it, so much so that across his 9-film career, only one of his projects has ever been an adaptation of someone else's work. A project that, to most Tarantino fans, initially at least, seems like one of his weaker efforts. Tarantino's fixation on dialogue and story structure makes him a perfect fit for a novel, so much so that he literally sees his process of screenwriting as being comparable to writing a book.
Do movies the way novels tell stories when they move around, that would be inherently cinematic.
Yeah. It only makes sense then that he would eventually take a stab at writing a full-on book, considering his desire to end his film career after 10 movies and pursue other ventures. But what material would he choose to write about? Well, rather than an original idea that he hadn't tackled before, Tarantino set his sights on his most recent film project almost immediately after finishing it, 2019's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. A massive success both critically and financially, it makes sense on paper why a publisher would want Tarantino to revisit his work in book form while it was still fresh in the public consciousness. But from a personal perspective, it makes even more sense why Tarantino would choose to translate this film to the page. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood not only relishes in a drifting, casual atmosphere that would lend itself well to a more stream of consciousness style of writing that a budding author might find comfortable, but the era of late 60s Hollywood is obviously one of Tarantino's most treasured periods of exploration. Tarantino lives and breathes cinema, and this transitionary period between old and new Hollywood is totally ripe for even more dissection than he can afford to fit into one near 3-hour film. Already there were entire sequences and characters completely karate chopped from the final edit of the film, so it makes sense that Tarantino might want to further delve into this material in a format that isn't beholden to as many moving pieces and time restrictions as a film. I can't remember exactly where I found the clip of him saying this, but I distinctly remember Tarantino talking about his writing process and saying that there are large chunks of his scripts that he knows will never end up in the final cut of the film. He embellishes in his script writing because these are simply elements that he himself enjoys writing and reading. I really wish I could find this clip to actually support my argument, but with this idea in mind, if you'll take my word for it, it actually makes a whole lot of sense that he'd want to extend that style of writing into a more public platform while retaining his usual sense of artistry. More than anything, a Quentin Tarantino film is a Quentin Tarantino film. His stories are immediately identifiable as products of his mind and ego. As such, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the novel, luxuriates in Tarantino applying himself as the omniscient narrator, delving into great detail about the mentalities of his characters at these critical moments in their lives. For example, Tarantino, film nerd that he is, translates his love of cinema into the film's most memorable character, Cliff Booth. A chunk of the novel is dedicated to Cliff's perspective, and consequently, Tarantino takes a moment to express Cliff's tumultuous relationship with Akira Kurosawa, even going so far as to give us Cliff's top 5 Kurosawa films. A strong list if I do say so myself, especially at that top spot, but let's be real, any Kurosawa top 5 without high and low needs a major revamp. This omniscient perspective is absolutely critical for the effect of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the book, an effect that's missing in the film version for its own justifiable reasons. That ambiguity helps with the film's more relaxed tone and certainly makes it more interpretable for viewers. But that perspective not only allows Tarantino to jump around and add detailed accounts for secondary or even altogether absent characters from the film, such as members of the Manson family, but also helps to contextualize certain moments that aren't as clear in the movie. The biggest example is the ever-popular fight scene between Cliff Booth and Bruce Lee. This scene drew a lot of controversy upon the film's release because it portrayed Lee as a seemingly far more arrogant person than he actually was. And in the novel, Tarantino somewhat addresses this by getting into both Lee's and Cliff's heads during the fight to grasp precisely what they were thinking at the time. By Tarantino's logic, Bruce is of course caught off guard by Cliff's adeptness in combat, and once the showboating first 2 rounds are done, both characters are evenly matched as they spend the entire fight continuously wondering how far they should go. In the world of the book, Bruce Lee isn't some arrogant asshole who wasn't as good as he claimed to be, because throughout this fight, he's careful not to underestimate his opponent after that earlier round, while also being careful to hold back just enough to avoid causing Cliff serious bodily damage that would jeopardize his own career as an actor and potentially put him in prison. Now, does that justify Tarantino's surface-level, arrogant portrayal of Bruce Lee and all? Personally, I don't really care, but at least it shows that the novelization was used as an opportunity to flesh out some of the characters in ways that the film's chosen style simply didn't allow Tarantino to do. Another major aspect of the novelization of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is its structure. Like its filmic counterpart, the book takes a drifting attitude towards the depiction of its events, moving back and forth in time with nonchalance. The biggest point of note is probably the fact that the film's ending, the big climax to a massive slow build, is relegated to an offhand comment about halfway through the novel. For the film, this violent, cathartic end to the story was crucial. For the novel, Tarantino is more concerned with exploring his characters on an emotional level, choosing instead to flesh out Rick Dalton's relationship with characters such as the standout child actor Trudy Frazier. In the end, without spoiling anything, a melancholy exchange with Steve McQueen is more than enough to give Dalton's story the same kick as 1,000 burning hippies. At the end of the day, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood makes for a noteworthy footnote in the history of relationships between books and cinema, if only for the unique avenue that Quentin Tarantino chose to take. Though not the first person to adapt a film into a book rather than the more conventional opposing approach, Tarantino has certainly given us one of the most significant examples of such by way of his noted interest in exploring precisely what his new chosen medium has to offer that the previous one didn't. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the film and the book, prove that we need not pit these differing art forms against each other when deciding which one is better. Sometimes they can work together in harmony, complementing each other for the sake of servicing the material as it deserves to be examined. Just please, for the love of God, Quentin, don't start writing theater too. I can't stand plays, and I'll be damned if I'm hauling my ass to New York to watch a live performance of any damn thing. Thank you all as always for watching this video. This is another one I'd been thinking about for a while but never had the chance to reread the book for, so I hope you enjoyed this more laid-back approach to my video essays to complement the style of the chosen film. Not sure when I'll have a new video up as my master's program is kicking into high gear, but I promise I'll be back before you know it. Until then, stay safe and, as always, I'll see you when I see you.